Hey there, friend. Come a little closer to the fire with me. Let the room stay dim. Let the candlelight keep doing that slow, patient dance on the walls. Tonight I want to tell you a darker truth that hides inside some of the oldest clay tablets we have. A truth that sounds almost like a whisper from the bottom of a riverbed. Because before humans existed, the story says the gods did the work. Not the kind of work we imagine when we picture gods. Not thunder thrown from bright thrones. Not effortless miracles. This is a tale of aching shoulders and baskets heavy with wet earth. Of divine hands wrapped around a pickaxe. Of tools set on fire in the night. Of a sleeping commander surrounded without warning. And a universe that changes because the workers finally stop. If you like drifting into stories like this, please tap like and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you would think, and it lets me keep making long, quiet nights like this for you. Now, take one slow breath in and let it go. Again. In and out. Soften your jaw. Let your tongue rest. Unclench the tiny places you do not notice you are holding. You are safe here. The fire is steady. The world outside can be whatever it wants to be. In here, we are only listening. And we begin in a silence that is not gentle. It is the kind of silence that comes before anyone has ever spoken. Before a market has ever opened. Before a child has ever laughed. Before a name has ever been carved into stone. A silence that sits heavy, like cool water pressed against your skin. A silence that has weight. I have always found it strange. Honestly, how often creation stories begin with light. As if the first thing the universe wanted was brightness. The old Mesopotamian tablets begin differently. They begin with pressure, with stillness that feels expectant, as if the world is holding its breath under a layer of dust that has not yet learned to drift. If you were standing here with me, you would see the tablets the way I always imagine them, small enough to fit in your hands, yet old enough to make your fingers feel young. Baked clay, the color of dry river mud. The surface is crowded with wedge marks, little angled footprints pressed into wet earth and then hardened by time. When you tilt the tablet, candlelight slides across those marks, and each line wakes up for a moment, then slips back into shadow. People dug these tablets from ruined cities, from places where walls collapsed into sand and then were covered again. You know that feeling when you pick up something left in an attic, and dust rises in a soft cloud, and the air smells like old wood and forgotten fabric. Imagine that, but multiplied by thousands of years. Dust that has had so long to settle that it almost seems respectful. And inside that dust, there is a record. Not of a love song, not of a hymn that makes the gods sound perfect. It reads, at moments, like paperwork, like a report, like a complaint filed by someone who cannot keep going. One of the key texts is called Atrahasis. In its Akkadian form, it was written long, long ago, and the opening line has startled readers ever since it was translated. The sense of it is plain, even when the exact words shift from scholar to scholar. When the gods, instead of humans, did the work. When the gods bore the loads, the gods' burden was too great, the work too hard, the trouble too much. Just sit with that a moment. The trouble too much. It does not sound like the sky splitting open with glory. It sounds like a throat that is dry from breathing dust. It sounds like someone pausing mid-task, hand on a basket rim, feeling their back tighten, and realizing there will be no relief unless they make it. So let us travel very slowly into that world the tablets describe. A world with no human footprints along the banks of the Tigris or Euphrates. No reed boats gliding through morning fog. No brick cities rising like steps toward the sky. Only the land itself, raw and unfinished. And beings the poets call gods. In this telling, the divine world has ranks. Like a palace has rooms. Like a temple has courtyards. Like an office has doors that some people may open and others must wait outside. There is the high, remote sky god, Anu, far above, so distant he almost feels like weather. Below him are the Anunnaki, the princely ones, the senior council, the kind of gods who decide, who decree, who speak in measured phrases while other hands do the lifting. And below them, there are younger gods, the workers. The tablets often call them the Igigi. Their name feels like a small sound in the mouth. Igigi. Like footsteps in a corridor. Like the soft tap of a tool against clay. They are the ones who carry the pickaxe and the basket. They are the ones who stand in ditches and trenches and river cuts. They dig canals. They open watercourses. They carve channels so water can be guided instead of feared. They raise earthworks. They shape the land into something that can be lived on, even by gods. The strangest part is how practical it all feels. In Mesopotamia, water is life, and water is threat. The rivers can feed you, and they can wipe you away. So a world that is going to hold cities someday must first be disciplined. It must be given veins. It must be given pathways for fresh water to move, and places for floodwater to be tamed. The tablets speak as if this is obvious. Before humans, somebody had to build the infrastructure, and the story says it was the gods. Try to picture it without rushing. A wide plain under a sky that seems too large. Heat that presses down during the day. Wind that carries fine grit into every fold of cloth. And along the low places where water will one day run, there are lines of workers. Not humans, not animals, but immortal beings bent over labor. They lift. They scrape. They drag baskets that leave wet trails. Their tools bite into earth the way tools still do now. With that stubborn refusal of the ground to yield easily, the work goes on, day after day, year after year. The text gives a number. 40 years. And here it becomes slippery. Some scholars argue it is symbolic, a way of saying a very long time. Others wonder if the old storytellers meant it more literally, if divine time was measured differently, or if the number simply sounded right to the ear. We cannot be sure. What we can be sure of is the feeling the number is meant to carry. Long enough for patience to thin. Long enough for the same motion to become a kind of trance, and then a kind of punishment. Long enough for the sound of the pickaxe to become the only music in the world. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it beneath the crackle of our fire. A distant rhythm. Metal or stone biting into clay. The soft slosh of water being redirected. Breath, breath, breath. A chorus of effort in an empty landscape. And above, somewhere, the administrators meet. The Anunnaki sit in council. They talk about domains, about assignments, about who rules what. They draw lots, the story says, dividing the cosmos like property. Anu takes the heavens. Enlil takes the earth and the air, the realm of command and storm. Enki takes the Apsu, the sweet water deep beneath, the place of hidden knowledge and quiet invention. Even the names feel like elements. Anu, the high vault. Enlil, the wind that orders. Enki, the water that finds a way. And while they decide, the Igigi keep digging. It is not hard to imagine how resentment grows in such a system, not in a dramatic burst, more like a slow accumulation, like silt settling at the bottom of a canal. A little more each day, invisible until one day the channel is clogged. The tablets even show the beginnings of it in small, ordinary words. The workers complain. They mutter. They denounce. It is so human that it makes my chest tighten every time I read it. Gods, immortal gods, grumbling down in a ditch. Like any exhausted crew, there is a certain kind of darkness in that, isn't there? Not the darkness of monsters, but the darkness of hierarchy, of distance between those who decide and those who carry, of a universe built on orders that do not feel fair. And yet, the story is not telling you to panic. It is telling you to notice, to watch the slow mechanics of power, to feel how even a cosmos can be arranged like a workplace. So tonight, as your breathing becomes slower and the candle smoke curls up in thin, lazy strands, we will keep descending into that ancient worksite. We will follow the river breath, the damp smell of cut earth, the soft slap of sandals in mud. And we will stay with the workers long enough to understand why one night, in the middle of a watch, they decide to stop. Not tomorrow. Not after one more shift. They decide. Enough. And in the hush that follows that decision, you can already sense a new shape waiting in the dark, like a lump of clay beside a water bowl, ready for hands that have not yet been invented. Let me slow down even more. Because this is the part where the mind usually tries to sprint ahead, and we are not sprinting tonight. Imagine a museum, late afternoon, the kind of hush that feels engineered, the kind that makes your footsteps sound too loud. A guard leans on a wall and does not look at anyone, but notices everything. Behind glass, a tablet sits on a stand, lit from above. That light is clean and modern, but the clay is ancient, still holding the faint scent of earth if you could somehow lift it to your nose. Tourists whisper, then drift away. Then it is just you, the glass, the clay, and time. You can see where the stylus pressed in. You can almost see the thumbprint of the scribe, a place where the wet clay resisted and then yielded. If you stare long enough, the wedge marks stop being marks and start being a path. A set of footprints leading you backward, step by step, out of your own century. Sometimes I picture the first person who recognized what those marks meant, how their breath might have caught, how their lamp might have trembled, the way a secret feels when you first realize it is a secret, and then the long patience of translation. Scholars leaning over copies, debating a single sign the way people debate a single word in a will. Because one sign can change a tone, can shift a god from tender to cruel, can turn a line from poetry into instruction. It is debated, for example, how sharply to separate the myth from the record. Some read these stories as metaphors that mirror real labor systems in ancient Mesopotamia, kings and priests at the top, workers in the fields and on canal banks below, the endless tax of forced labor that built cities of mud brick and temples of baked clay. In that reading, the gods are not literal beings with pickaxes, but reflections of social structure thrown onto the sky. Other people, less cautious, take the tablets like testimony. They ask what the scribes believed they were preserving. They point at how specific the details can be, how the words sometimes feel like minutes from a meeting, like a complaint spoken aloud. I do not think we can settle it completely. The tablets do not let us. They sit there, patient, letting each generation see its own fears in them. But no matter how you read them, the mood is unmistakable. This is a world where work is sacred and exhausting, where the land is not simply there, but made useful through effort, where order is something you build, not something you receive. And if you have ever stood near a river in the early morning, you know what that kind of effort is for. The river breathes. It does. You can hear it, a low sound beneath the surface, the water pressing against itself as it moves. On some days it smells clean, sharp, almost metallic. On others it smells like mud and life and rot and reeds. It is never just water. It is a moving boundary. Now place that river in a world before towns, before names. The breath is still there, steady and indifferent. And someone has decided it must be given a bed, a channel, a direction. So the Igigi step down into the soft ground, and the ground takes their weight. Their sandals sink with a quiet suction sound. When they lift a foot, it releases slowly, like the earth is reluctant to let go. Their clothing darkens at the hem where dampness climbs. Their hands learn the texture of clay, slick when wet, stubborn when it begins to dry, cracking into plates that cut the skin if you grab it wrong. A basket is filled. The basket is carried. The basket is tipped. Over and over. A simple motion repeated until the mind goes quiet and the body becomes the clock. In that repetition there is a kind of sleep, but it is not restful. It is the sleep of being used. and still. The Anunnaki decree. The Anunnaki calculate. The Anunnaki sit in places where the floor is clean. That is how resentment becomes not a feeling, but a fact. It begins as a number that keeps shrinking. One more year. One more season. One more assignment. One more set of baskets. The mind keeps saying just a little more until it cannot say it anymore. And then a night comes when the air is cooler. The stars are hard points of light. The wind carries the smell of water and distant salt. The workers gather where the ditch meets the bank, and for once the sound is not digging. For once, it is whispering. For once, it is a plan. The plan does not begin with a shout. It begins with a pause. One worker stops for a moment longer than usual, hand resting on the smooth rim of a basket. Another notices. A third pretends not to, but shifts closer. In a world where every day is measured by quotas and orders, a pause is already a kind of disobedience. It is small, almost invisible, like the first crack in a dried mud wall. When I imagine the Igigi, I try not to turn them into faceless symbols. The tablets do not give us their personal names the way later myths name heroes. They are a collective, and that is part of what makes the story feel heavy. Still, a collective is made of bodies, of breaths, of people who have to blink dust out of their eyes. So I picture them as you might picture any crew that has worked too long in the same place. Some are silent. Some are sharp-tongued. Some make quiet jokes that keep the hours from swallowing them whole. Some stare across the flat land and feel something in their chest that they do not have words for. Something like grief. Something like anger. Something like the simple desire to lie down and be done. Their tools are plain. A pickaxe that bites into packed earth. A shovel that scrapes and lifts. A basket woven from reeds. Its sides rough against the forearm. It is almost disappointing, isn't it? We want divine tools to glitter. We want them to hum with power. The old stories, though, are not trying to impress you with special effects. They are trying to impress you with weight, with repetition, with the way labor changes the mind. In Mesopotamian imagination, this work is not optional. The world is a project, and the project needs maintenance. The canals have to be opened and kept open. The riverbanks must be shaped into something that will not betray you when the water rises. The earth must be moved, heaped, leveled. The story even hints at mountains being raised, as if the land itself is sculpted by stubborn effort. Sometimes I think the old poets looked at the landscape and saw, everywhere, the marks of human labor canals cut straight through soil, raised embankments, fields laid out like patterns. And they did what humans always do. They pushed the origin of those marks backward into deep time until the marks belonged to the gods. Because that is one way to make your own exhausting work feel less lonely. To believe you are continuing something older than you, something cosmic. There is a place the texts linger around, a name that keeps returning like a low note in a song. The Apsu, the deep fresh water beneath the earth, not groundwater in the modern sense, not a hidden pipe system, but a primal sea of sweet water that underlies everything. Springs rise from it. Rivers draw from it. Life depends on it. And there, in that underworld of fresh water and quiet, Enki dwells. I always picture Enki as a different kind of power than Enlil. Enlil is the wind that orders, the voice that expects obedience. Enki is the water that listens. Water does not argue with a rock. It touches it, then goes around it. It finds seams. It finds weakness. It finds a way through. The temples built for Enki in later cities were placed near marshlands, where the boundary between land and water is soft, where reeds whisper, where the air smells green and wet. The people who lived there understood something important. Water is both gentle and unstoppable. It can make a field bloom. It can also take a house apart in a single night. So if the gods were building a world, of course the Absu would matter. If you close your eyes now, you can almost feel it. The coolness of damp stone, the slow dripping of water in a chamber you cannot quite see, the sense that below the busy surface, there is a deeper, quieter realm where plans can form. Above that realm, Enlil commands the surface. The texts describe the early division of the cosmos as if it were administrative procedure. Lots are drawn. Domains assigned, heaven to one, earth and air to another, the deep, sweet water to a third, and the Anunnaki, the senior gods, approve the arrangement. It is neat. It is orderly. Then the order must be built into reality. That is when the workers are sent out. The Igigi stand where the river will be and begin to persuade the land. They cut a shallow path first, then deepen it. They lift earth and toss it aside, and the piles become banks. They stamp down mud so it holds. They guide water into new channels, and the water resists at first, then accepts, and begins to run where it is told. They open springs from the depths, the story says. The phrase is simple, but when you picture it, it feels mysterious. Do they dig until water seeps? Then surges do they cut through layers of clay and sand until the Abzu breathes upward? The text does not explain. It assumes you understand what it means to dig until water comes. If you have ever dug in damp ground, you know the moment. The soil darkens. It cools. A thin shine appears. The smell changes. You can almost taste it in the air. And then, slowly, water gathers, not as a dramatic fountain, but as a patient presence. Now, multiply that moment across miles, across decades, across an entire plain. The work goes on so long that time becomes a blur. 40 years, the tablets say. And again, the number carries mood more than measurement. It is long enough that the workers begin to measure their lives not by beginnings and endings, but by aches, by the way the skin hardens, by how the same muscles burn every day. It is long enough that some of them stop remembering a time before the ditch. Long enough that the canal feels like the world, and the world feels like the canal. And above them, in clean halls, the Anunnaki remain the ones who decide. The story is blunt about that. The 7 great Anunnaki. It says in some versions, Make the Igigi bear the work. Make them. That small phrase has teeth. It implies compulsion. It implies that the workers did not choose this, and that the rulers know it. There is a detail I cannot stop thinking about: the number of workers. 600. The tablets sometimes give that figure, and once again, the literalness is debated. It could be a sacred number. It could be a way of saying many. It could be a memory of something else. But in the story, it does a particular job. It makes the rebellion feel coordinated. It makes it feel like a crowd, like a force, like a ring of bodies moving together through dark. 600 is large enough that whispers can travel and still remain whispers. Large enough that when everyone stops, the silence is startling. And that is what they choose. Not because they do not understand the importance of the canals, not because they hate the water, but because the burden has become too much. The tablets paint the emotional build-up in an almost unbearable calm. They do not show a single dramatic speech. They show the slow gathering of resentment, complaining, denouncing, muttering down in the ditch. You can hear it, if you listen. Not the words exactly, but the texture of the voice. A low murmur that vibrates with fatigue. The way people speak when they do not believe anyone in power will listen, so they speak to each other instead. When the air is thick with damp, and the ground is cold under the knees, and the work is still not done. Then, a shift. One night, they choose the moment the tablets call halfway through the watch. The dark middle hours, the time when the world feels paused, when even animals are quieter, when the stars look like small holes in a black cloth. They gather away from the ditch. They come together in a place where the earth is drier, where the baskets have been stacked. Some carry their tools. Some drag them by the handle, the metal scraping softly, a sound that feels wrong in the night. No one is laughing. There is a kind of ceremony to exhaustion. You can feel it in the way bodies move. Slow, deliberate, as if every step is being weighed. Footsteps in dust. Footsteps on packed clay. The occasional clink of a tool. The faint breath of the river nearby. Steady and indifferent. And then they do something that is so symbolic, so final, that even across millennia, it feels like a door slamming shut. They burn their tools. The tablets say it plainly. They set fire to their tools. They abandon their baskets. Picture it. Dry reeds. Oiled wood. A spark caught and fed. Then flame licking up a handle, turning it black. The smell of burning fiber. The bright, harsh light that makes faces look older, makes eyes look deep and strange. In that light, the ditch itself seems like an open wound in the land. This is not mindless destruction. This is a declaration. No going back. No quiet return to work after a scolding. They are forcing a crisis. When the tools are burning, the night feels warmer. The firelight throws shadows on the ground that twist like creatures. The Igigi stand in a circle, 600 bodies around a small blazing truth, and for the first time in a very long time, their hands are empty. Then they begin to walk. Not toward the canals, toward Enlil's house, toward the place where command sleeps. The path is long enough for the fire behind them to shrink into a glowing point, like an ember carried in the mind. The air cools again. The ground changes underfoot from soft to hard to soft. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls, confused by the movement. The river keeps breathing, and as they approach, the great house rises out of darkness. A residence, a palace, a temple, whatever you want to call it. A place built for someone who gives orders. The workers surround it. They encircle it, the way a flood encircles a hill, patient and complete. Inside, Enlil sleeps. The tablets linger on that detail, and so will I. Because it is the sharpest edge in the whole scene, the commander resting, unaware. The workers outside, awake, carrying the weight of 40 years in their shoulders, standing in the dark with no tools left to pick up. When the dawn comes, something will have to happen. A messenger will run. A council will be called. Questions will be asked in anger. Someone will demand to know who leads the rabble. Someone will want punishment. But right now, it is still night. Right now. The circle holds, and if you listen carefully, you can hear two kinds of silence at once. The silence of a sleeping ruler, and the silence of workers who have finally stopped. In that layered quiet, a new idea stirs, deep as the Apsu, waiting for the voice that will speak it. They do not break in. They do not tear the house apart. They simply remain. That is the part I find most unsettling, in a quiet way. The restraint, the discipline. It feels like a strike line held by people who understand that violence would make them easy to dismiss, easy to condemn. They are not asking to become the rulers. They are asking to stop dying inside their own immortality. Eventually, the house stirs. A door opens. A guard, or a lesser spirit, or simply an anxious functionary, steps out into the ring of bodies and freezes. You can imagine his breath catching. One voice tries to speak, then stops, and then word travels inward, like a drop of ink spreading through water. Enlil wakes. His anger arrives before he does. The wind that is his nature seems to rise, rattling reeds, lifting dust. When he steps out, the air feels sharper. The workers do not move aside. They do not bow. They hold their ground. Enlil does what rulers often do when they are surprised by unity. He asks for a leader. He asks for a name to blame. The text gives him the words of someone who cannot imagine that a whole group might decide together. Who is in charge of the rabble? Who declared war, war? That is how he frames it. Not grievance, not exhaustion. War. A messenger is sent, and the tablets remember that messenger's name, Nusku, a god of fire and light in some traditions, a bearer of messages, the one who moves between rooms. Nusku steps into the circle, and the workers speak to him plainly. No poetry, no negotiation tactics dressed up as virtue. Just the body speaking its limits. The load is excessive. It is killing us. We have put a stop to the digging. The work is too hard. The trouble is too much. Every single one of us has agreed. When Nusku returns and delivers these words, the council gathers. This is where the story tightens like a rope. Anu is summoned from his distance, the sky god who rarely needs to concern himself with mud. Enki is called from the Absu, from the deep quiet where solutions tend to form. The Anunnaki sit, serious now, because a system has cracked, and cracks can spread. Enlil wants punishment. Of course he does. He wants to restore order by making an example. He wants an instigator, one worker to crush so the rest will remember fear. And then, a strange detail. The text says, Enlil weeps. Tears flow. It is one of those moments where the clay tablet feels almost alive, as if the scribe hesitated, stylus hovering, deciding whether to include that softness in the face of command. Why does Enlil weep? Anger can make the eyes wet. Frustration can. Even shame can, though rulers rarely admit it. We cannot know. All we can do is sit beside the fire and feel the oddness of it. A god of command, crying in a council chamber because his workers have stopped. And then Enki speaks, not yet with the final plan, not yet with the solution that will change everything, but with the posture of someone who has listened, someone who has heard the words, "It is killing us," and treated them as information, not as insult. Water does that. It receives. The room stills. The candle flames in my imagination stop flickering for a breath. Even the dust seems to hang in place, because when Enki begins to talk, you can feel the story turning toward creation, toward clay shaped into something new. Not for love, for labor. And that is where we will rest our attention for now. Right on the edge of Enki's next sentence, while the fire keeps its slow rhythm, and your breathing keeps finding its own. The room in the council grows quiet in the way a deep pond grows quiet when a stone has just been dropped into it. There are ripples, yes, but they move outward without noise, and everyone watches them because they have no choice. Enki does not slam his hand on the table. He does not demand obedience. He speaks as if he is describing the shape of a riverbed, something that simply is, something you must work with if you want the water to stop misbehaving. He begins with a thought that sounds almost like mercy, but is really a different kind of calculation. Do not punish them, he says. If you were standing here with me, you would feel how scandalous that is. A refusal to punish is not neutrality in a hierarchy. It is a decision. It is an admission that force will not solve everything. It is a crack in the idea that command is enough. Enlil bristles. Of course. The wind in his nature rises. He wants a name. He wants a neck to bend. He wants to restore the world to its old arrangement with one clean act. But Enki keeps speaking, slow and careful, as if he is laying reeds in a line to guide water. The problem is not that the workers are rebellious, he says. The problem is that they are gods. Gods are not meant to spend endless ages in ditches. Even saying it out loud changes the air, because it reframes everything. It turns the rebellion into evidence, not treason. It says the system itself is wrong. It is unsustainable. It will crack again. It will crack wider. And then Enki offers the solution. Create something new. Create a being that can carry the pickaxe and the basket. Create a servant species. Create humans. The line lands like a cold drop on the back of your neck. Not because the idea is complicated. It is painfully simple. That is what makes it dark. The old tablets do not wrap the proposal in tenderness. They do not call it a gift. They do not say the new being will be loved. It is a labor solution, a replacement, a way to set the gods free. If you listen, you can hear the quiet negotiation happening in the council chamber, not only between gods, but between fear and necessity. Enlil does not want to lose authority. The Anunnaki do not want more disorder. Anu wants the heavens to stay remote and undisturbed. Everyone wants the ditch to stop producing rebellions. And the Igigi, outside, still ring the house like a dark horizon line. 600 bodies, 600 breaths. A collective refusal that does not need speeches. Some scholars argue that this entire scene mirrors real human labor disputes, that ancient scribes encoded their own experience in divine language. It is debated, as most things are when clay is your archive and time is your eraser. Yet even if it is an allegory, it is an allegory with teeth. It remembers that workers can win. And then, quietly, the council agrees. You can almost feel the shift. The decision is made, and with it, the shape of the world changes. The burden will be moved downward, away from divine shoulders, onto a new kind of back. A moment like that deserves slowness. So let us step away from the council and follow Enki down into his realm, because this is where creation becomes less like a spoken command and more like craft. The Apsu, the fresh water deep beneath. Imagine descending through layers of earth, not as a falling, but as a gentle sinking. The pressure increases. The sound of the surface fades, replaced by a low hush like the inside of a shell. Water is everywhere, not as a flood, but as presence, cool and patient. The air smells clean and mineral. There is clay down here, too, soft and dark, heavy with moisture. In later cities, priests built Enki's temple as the house of the Apsu. They placed it near marshlands, where land and water blur. But in the story's deep time, before cities, before reed roofs and brick walls, the Apsu is itself a palace, a workshop, a place of quiet lamps and slow thinking. I like to picture Enki walking there barefoot, not because the tablets say it, but because it fits his element. Feet touching damp stone, the sensation of coolness rising into the body, water lapping softly against the edges of a platform, a faint echo of footsteps, not sharp, but muted, like the world itself is padded with wet clay. He does not rush. Water does not rush unless it is forced. He prepares, and preparation is everything in these stories. The gods are powerful, yes, but they also seem oddly procedural. Committees, oaths, Tools. Workshops. You could almost imagine lists scratched into clay materials required. Steps to follow. Names of witnesses. Here is the first material. Clay. It makes sense. Humans will be earth creatures in a land of mud and river silt. Their cities will be built from the same substance. Their tablets will record their lives in the same substance. Clay is memory for Mesopotamia. It holds marks. It holds fingerprints. It hardens into proof. Enki gathers the clay. Slowly. He kneels near the edge where water meets earth. His hands sink into the soft mass. It yields, cool and thick. When he lifts his fingers, the clay clings and then slides, leaving streaks like dark paint. He presses it, feeling for stones, for grit. He pulls the clay apart and folds it back on itself, kneading it the way a potter needs to remove air pockets. The motion is steady. Press, fold, press. The sound is soft, wet, intimate. If you have ever touched river mud, you know the smell. It is not unpleasant, not exactly. It is ancient. It smells like minerals and decay and life returning. It smells like something that has been underwater thinking for a long time. The second material is harder to speak about softly. Blood. Not human blood. There are no humans yet. Divine blood, drawn from a god. This is where the darkness deepens, because creation in these texts is rarely free. It is paid for. It costs something. In the Atrahasis tradition, there are variations. In some tellings, a god is chosen. A sacrifice is made. The wording is stark, almost administrative. A god is slain so that something can be formed from the mixture of his essence and clay. The story is not gory. It does not linger on pain. It presents the act as a grim necessity, the way a system might accept a loss to stabilize itself. In another related tradition, the Anunnaki, the god whose blood becomes part of humanity, is Kingu, a figure associated with rebellion, with the wrong side of a cosmic war. In that telling, humans are made from the blood of a condemned instigator, a defeated leader, mixed with clay. It is chilling in its implication. We are servants made from a rebel substance, ordered to maintain order, yet carrying a trace of defiance inside. We cannot be sure how ancient listeners held these contradictions in their minds. Perhaps they did not see it as contradiction. Perhaps it felt like truth, that obedience and rebellion are both part of being alive. In the Apsu, Enki prepares the clay and waits for what the council will provide. A bound god is brought down. Or perhaps the sacrifice happens above, and the blood is carried to Enki like a sealed vessel, a dark offering. I imagine a bowl, not fancy, just functional, held carefully in two hands. The surface of the blood is glossy, reflecting the dim light like black water at night. The scent is metallic, sharp, reminding the body of its own fragile warmth. Enki does not rejoice. He is not celebrating death. He is using what is available, because that is what problem solvers do in a world where even gods have limits. He pours the blood into the clay. At first it sits on top, a dark sheen on darker mud. Then, slowly, it begins to sink, to spread, to stain. Enki's fingers folded in. The clay changes texture, becoming heavier, more cohesive, as if the added essence gives it a new kind of stubbornness. Press, fold, press. The motion continues until there is no separation, until the blood is not visible as blood, but as the color of the clay itself, deepened. And then comes shaping. This is the moment that always makes me think of a museum again. Not the modern glass, but the hush around origins, a quiet so deep you can hear your own breath. Enki's workshop is the oldest studio, the first hands forming a new kind of life. He takes a portion of the mixture and rolls it between his palms. The sound is faint, like wet leather. The sphere becomes an oblong. He pinches one end, pulls it, stretches it into limbs. Not perfect, not symmetrical. A first attempt, then another, refining the shapes. Honestly, I like that the story does not make the first human sound elegant. The first forms are crude. They are made for work, not for beauty. Enki's fingers press in small indentations for eyes. The eyes do not yet see. He shapes a mouth. The mouth does not yet speak. He smooths the surface where a chest will rise and fall. He creates a back that can bend and straighten, a neck that can carry the weight of looking upward. All of it formed from the same substances that have always been here, earth and water, mixed with something that has already lived. When the figure lies complete, it is still clay. It must be animated. The texts sometimes speak of breath, of life force, of divine essence placed inside. They are not precise in a mechanical way. They do not describe lungs filling or hearts starting. They describe a transfer of vitality, as if life is a substance that can be handed over like a tool. Enki leans close. The candlelight in our room flickers, and in my imagination, a lamp in the Apsu flickers too. Its flame reflects in the wet surface of the clay figure. Enki's face is near, and his voice is low, not commanding, but instructive. And the clay changes, not dramatically, not with lightning, more like a seed swelling when it finally takes water. A subtle shift. The surface warms. The chest makes the smallest movement. Air enters and leaves, uncertain at first, like the new being is learning the rhythm. A sound escapes the mouth. Not a word, just a breathy note. That note is the beginning of the human story. Above, the council will celebrate their relief. The Anunnaki will feel the weight lift from their shoulders. Enlil will regain a sense of control. The Igigi will be told they are free. But down here, in the Apsu, the first human opens eyes into dim light and does not understand anything yet. That is another kind of darkness to be created for a purpose you did not choose, before you can even name what you are. Enki watches. Water listens. The new creature breathes. And somewhere, far above, the smell of burned tools still hangs in the night air, fading slowly, like a lesson that will not be forgotten. Because this is not the end of the story. It is the handoff. Before the agreement is spoken aloud, there is ceremony. A silence thickens, and then someone clears their throat as if even gods must remind themselves they have voices. The council chamber smells of dry clay tablets and lamp oil. Dust floats through the light in slow spirals, the way it does in an archive. They call the messenger again, because authority likes to hear the same truth twice. Nusku repeats the rebels' complaint. Simple and unstoppable, the load is excessive. The trouble is too much. Enlil looks ready to reach for punishment out of habit, as if fear could patch every crack. But even Anu can see the danger in that. Execute the workers, and the canals do not dig themselves. Force them back, and the rebellion returns. So the agreement arrives like a sigh. Necessary. Cold. And once it is decided, the council turns practical, as if redrawing a cosmic workforce chart. The burden moves downward, away from divine shoulders, onto a new kind of back. Enki rises and leaves, carrying the solution like water cupped in his hands. Outside, the ring of Igigi bodies holds steady in the night, and the smell of burned tools still lingers. Then he descends, down through layered earth where silt from old floods rests on compacted clay. The deeper he goes, the more surface noise fades, until only the Abzu remains cool air, damp stone, a low hush of water. In that dim workshop, he sinks his hands into clay again, greeting the material that remembers every fingerprint. And when the blood is added, he pauses. No speech. Just the quiet acceptance that creation, here, has a cost. The pickaxe is about to change hands. The first breath is not loud. It is almost shy. It reminds me of the way a small flame catches on a wick, the way it trembles before it steadies. The clay figure, still damp, still smelling of earth and mineral water, draws air in and lets it go. The sound is soft enough that you might miss it if you were listening for thunder. Enki watches, and I imagine his expression as something close to tired kindness, though the tablets never quite give us faces. They give us roles. Still, roles are lived by minds, and minds carry textures. He has made a solution. He has also made a problem, though he will not say it yet. Because to create a worker is to create a being that can suffer. And suffering has a way of making questions. The newborn human does not stand immediately. Limbs that were shaped for labor must learn the balance of gravity. The figure's hands flex. Fingers curl, then open. Clay nails, still soft. The skin is not skin yet, not like ours, but it is becoming something that will dry, toughen, scar. The eyes blink slowly, lids heavy, as if they were molded a little too thick. The Apsu is quiet around them. Water breathes in its own way. The air is cool. The light is dim, lamplight reflecting off wet stone. The chamber smells of damp clay and the faint sharpness of whatever vessel held the blood. Outside this underground workshop, the world is still night, still full of dust and distant stars. But in the story's deep time, this is dawn, not the dawn of a day. The dawn of a species Enki does not leave the human alone. He guides. He places a hand at the creature's shoulder, steadying it, and the touch looks gentle but purposeful. He coaxes the first human upright. The legs tremble. Feet press into the damp floor and leave prints that fill slowly with moisture. The human sways. Enki steadies again, patient as water around a stone. Then comes the first instruction. Not a sermon, not a blessing, a task. The tablets frame it plainly. The service of the gods is imposed. The gods are set free. I always pause at that phrasing. Imposed. Set free. The verbs tell you everything. Humans do not volunteer. They are assigned. They are designed to take on burden. In the council's mind, it is not cruelty. It is logistics. And yet, there is something in the scene that feels strangely intimate. A god teaching a new creature how to exist. A voice low in a damp chamber. A first set of footsteps in the Abzu, soft on stone. If you were standing here with me, you might feel conflicted. A certain tenderness in the act of guidance, and a certain coldness in the purpose, both at once. That is the texture of these old myths. They do not let you stay comfortable. Enki leads the human to the edge, where earth meets water. He shows the clay, the way it yields. He shows how to scoop it, how to shape it, how to press it. He shows the basic relationship between hand and material. The human watches, eyes wide, and imitates. The first imitation is clumsy. The clay collapses. The human tries again. The hands learn. Learning, in this story, is not a luxury. It is survival. Now, we move upward, slowly, because the human must be brought into the world that needs work. The passage from Abzu to surface is like waking from a deep sleep. The air warms. The light grows harsher, more open. The smell changes from mineral dampness to dust and wind. When the human steps onto the plane, the sky feels enormous, almost hostile in its emptiness. And here, waiting, are the things the gods used to hold. Tools. New tools. Perhaps the old ones were burned and their ashes scattered. Perhaps fresh ones were made. In either case, the human is given the pickaxe and the basket. The weight is real. The basket presses against the hip. The tool handle digs into the palm. The human does not know what the tool means. Not yet. But the body begins to understand. A tool is an extension, a lever, a promise of soreness. The Igigi are there too, I think, watching from a distance. 600 gods who once carried this weight, now seeing a smaller creature take it up. How would that look to them, relief? Surely. A strange guilt. Maybe. Or perhaps only the clean satisfaction of being freed. We cannot be sure. The tablets do not open their inner rooms to us. They give us outlines. But the outlines are enough to imagine a hush. A moment where even gods hold their breath. Because something has been swapped. The rebellion worked. The workers won. And the cost is a new kind of being born into duty. There is a grim elegance to it. In one night, the cosmic workforce is reorganized. The Anunnaki remain administrators. The Igigi are promoted, or at least removed from the ditch. Humans become the labor force. The system stabilizes. For a time, and that phrase matters. For a time, because the texts themselves, in their later parts, cannot help revealing what happens when you create a being that can multiply. Workers do not remain a fixed number. They grow. They spread. They build. They become noisy. The myths say, the sound of life disturbs the gods. The cycle begins again, in a new form. But let us not rush there. Not yet. For now, the first humans go to the canals. They dig where the Igigi once dug. Their shoulders are smaller, their lives shorter, but their work is the same. The earth resists. The mud clings. The basket fills and empties. The rhythm begins. I want you to feel the slowness of that rhythm, because it is the true heartbeat of this story. A foot presses into wet ground. The ground accepts, then releases. Another step. Another. The sound is soft, a suction whisper. The air smells like river mud. A thin wind carries grit that sticks to sweat. The sun rises and makes the water flash like metal. The day grows hot. The hands blister, then callous. The body adapts, because adaptation is what living things do when they are forced to. If you have ever done a repetitive task, something simple and physical, you know how the mind drifts. It leaves the present and floats. It thinks of nothing, then thinks of everything. It invents stories. It counts time by breaths. It finds small comforts, the sound of water, the shade of a bank, the brief coolness when you step into the ditch. Now, imagine an entire civilization built on that rhythm, because that is what happens next, according to the logic embedded in these myths. The canals are not just part of the landscape. They are sacred reenactment. Every time a human digs, a human repeats the work that gods once did. The ditch becomes a ritual, whether the worker knows it or not. The sweat becomes offering. Some scholars argue this is exactly the point the myth justifies the temple economy. It tells workers that labor is their purpose because it is how the cosmos was arranged. It makes hierarchy feel like nature. It makes exploitation feel like destiny. It is debated, yes. But the myth also carries a dangerous memory. The first workers rebelled. The first system broke. Even the gods had to negotiate. And humans, being made partly from a rebel's essence in some tellings, may carry that memory like a faint taste in the blood. A tendency to look up from the ditch and wonder why. The tablets do not say that directly. Of course, they do not give you a manifesto. They give you a story where the gods themselves, the highest authorities, were once vulnerable to collective refusal. That is a quiet kind of power. Now, as humans multiply, the world changes. The plain that was once empty begins to hold marks that remain. Paths, rows, fields, later, bricks, walls, temples, cities. The breath of the river becomes part of daily life. The smell of mud becomes the smell of home. And somewhere, in clean halls, gods receive offerings. They become dependent in their own way. The myths even admit it with startling bluntness in later episodes when humans are gone. The gods hunger. They gather like flies around sacrifice. They need what they created. Mutual dependency, wrapped in hierarchy. That is the shape of Mesopotamian theology. And it is not gentle. Still. There is a strange dignity in it too. The myth does not say humans are useless. It says humans are essential. The world will not hold together without hands in the dirt. Order is not free. It is built and maintained. And when you think of it that way, you can almost feel the deep time behind every simple act. A person lifting a basket of earth is connected to a divine strike line in the dark. A hand smoothing clay is connected to Enki's first kneading. A canal bank is connected to the moment the gods admitted their own limits. The story's darkness is not only in its origin, it is in its mirror. Because how many times in human history has power solved its problem the same way a shortage of labor becomes a reason to create or capture workers? A rebellion becomes a reason to redesign the system rather than address the pain. The burden moves downward. The rulers rest, even when the rulers are gods. So tonight, as the fire in our room settles and the candle wax gathers in slow drops, let this knowledge come to you gently, not like fear, but like understanding. You were not made from softness in this story. You were made from clay and consequence. And yet, even in that, there is something quietly hopeful, if you let it be, because the first workers refused, and the world changed. The system was not eternal. It could be altered. Humans were created as an answer to a labor crisis. Yes, but humans do not remain only answers. They become questions. In the next part of our tale, those questions will grow louder. The gods will begin to notice the sound of humanity, the way a crowded city hums at night, the way voices carry, the way numbers swell. Enlil will grow restless. Enki will keep listening. And somewhere, deep beneath it all, the Apsu will hold its quiet, remembering the first time clay learned to breathe. When the first humans reach the canal banks, the world around them is still mostly empty. No walls, no roofs, just water and earth and sky. They learn the first rhythm of labor. Lift, carry, empty, return. The ditch deepens, the channel steadies, and water begins to obey. The land drinks. A thin green edge appears where moisture lingers. Soon there are more humans. Footsteps multiply. Paths form. Clay is shaped in hands, dried in sun, stacked into low walls that will become towns. Then cities. The gods receive offerings in clean halls. Yet the canal still needs dredging. The ditch still fills with silt. Floods still come. Too. The rivers rise, leave behind new layers of mud, and years later those layers harden into quiet proof that order is never permanent. At midday, heat presses down like a hand. The air shimmers above the water, Sweat runs into the eyes and tastes of salt and dust. The basket strap rubs the same spot on the shoulder until skin learns to harden. When the sun begins to tilt, the light turns amber, and the canal surface becomes a moving sheet of copper. At night, the workers gather close to small fires. The flames are low, careful, because wind can rise without warning on open plains. Someone pats damp clay onto the edge of the fire to hold a cooking pot steady. Someone presses a thumb into a soft brick and smiles without knowing why. There is a lull, a soft breathing of many bodies. In that lull, the river's quiet sound becomes almost comforting, like a slow chant. They speak in short phrases, then in long drifting stories. The stories do not challenge the gods directly. Not yet. They circle around the idea of burden, the way a moth circles a lamp. They name the ache in the hands. They name the strange feeling of being made for something without being asked. And once you name a feeling, it stops being only pain. It becomes thought. You can almost hear the first questions forming, not as rebellion, but as curiosity. Who decided this? Why does the world demand so much digging? Why does water have to be forced into lines? Questions like that are quiet, but they do not disappear. They settle into the mind like silt settles into a channel, slowly building up. For now, the first humans only know the daily work, and the gods above begin to rest. But the adjustment contains a seed. Workers who can suffer can also whisper, and a whisper can become a question. In the next part, the human numbers will swell like water after heavy rain. The sound of living will reach Enlil's ears. His patience will thin. And Enki, deep in his watery realm, will listen for the smallest crack in the system. Night comes to the riverlands, and it never arrives alone. It brings insects that sing in thin, persistent lines. It brings a faint chill that settles on damp skin. It brings the smell of smoke from small fires, and the deeper smell of mud that has been warmed all day and is now cooling again, releasing its breath back into the dark. And it brings sound. At first, the sound is modest. A few voices, a baby's brief cry, the soft scrape of a bowl on clay, the low murmur of a story told to keep someone from thinking too hard about tomorrow. But the story we are following does not stay small. Humans multiply. They do what living things do when the river feeds them, when the canals hold water in place long enough for green things to rise, when the harvest is steady enough that children survive, and those children grow, and those grown children have children of their own. The villages thicken. Paths turn into tracks. Tracks become roads. The night becomes crowded with little points of firelight, as if the earth has learned to mimic the stars. And the sound grows with it. It becomes the sound of grain being poured into jars, of reeds being cut and bundled, of brick molds being slapped against wet clay, of donkey hooves on packed earth, of laughter after a long day, of argument when a boundary stone is moved, of singing when someone is brave enough to feel happy. You know that feeling when you are trying to sleep and the world will not stop moving. A neighbor shifts furniture. A dog barks. Someone's voice carries through a wall. It is not violent sound. it is ordinary sound. Yet it presses on the mind, and the mind starts to resent it because it cannot control it. In the old Mesopotamian myths, that resentment becomes divine. Enlil cannot rest. That is how the tablets often frame it. The Lord of Command, the keeper of order, the one who wants the world arranged in neat lines like canal banks, begins to feel disturbed by the sheer presence of humanity. Their numbers swell. Their voices rise. Their lives spill outward like water that has found a weak point in a dike. Some scholars argue this is a metaphor for ruling class anxiety, a reflection of priests and officials watching crowded cities grow and feeling that old fear: too many people, too much motion, too much noise, too many wills that might not stay obedient. It's debated, of course, how literally the ancient storytellers intended it. But in the myth, the effect is clear. The gods, who once reshuffled the cosmos to solve a labor crisis, now discover that the solution has its own consequences. A worker species does not remain a fixed tool. A worker species becomes a population, and population becomes pressure. So Enlil calls the council again. I like to imagine the same room, the same dust floating in lamplight, the same clay tablets waiting to be pressed with decisions. Maybe the chairs are different. Maybe the mood is different. But the basic pattern repeats. There is a problem in the system. The system must respond. Enlil's response is not gentle. He does not ask humans to whisper. He does not send a warning like a soft knock on the door. He chooses restraint by force. The first measure, in many tellings, is sickness, not as a random tragedy, but as policy. A quiet chill begins in a few bodies, then spreads. Breath becomes heavy. Skin grows hot. Eyes glaze. People lie down and do not rise. The canals still run, but fewer hands hold the tools. The fields begin to go untended in corners. The sound of the city thins, not because anyone chose silence, but because throats cannot keep singing. This is how the myth speaks. In its cold administrative language, reduce the numbers. And here is where Enki appears again, not as a hero in shining armor, but as a presence that keeps leaning into the cracks. Enki listens. He hears the coughing. He hears the muttering of frightened families. He hears the new quiet that is not peaceful, but hollow. He knows why it is happening. He knows Enlil's temperament, the way wind can turn suddenly sharp, the way authority can become impatient when it feels challenged. So Enki does what he does best. He finds a workaround. He cannot openly defy the council. Not yet. He cannot walk into Enlil's hall and say, "To stop." The story is not written that way. It is written like a family dispute in which one sibling uses cleverness because direct confrontation would break something too large. So Enki teaches the humans what to do. Sometimes the tablets describe it as advice. Stop making offerings to the wrong god, and the plague will pass. Turn your prayers toward Namtar, the bringer of disease, or toward the specific deity associated with the affliction. And bargain. Offer quietly. Make promises. Adjust the ritual economy the way you adjust a canal gate. In other tellings, Enki's guidance is more subtle. passing through intermediaries, through dreams, through the mouth of a wise person who says, almost casually, you should do this instead. The result is the same. The humans respond, not with rebellion, but with ritual strategy. They clean the house. They burn incense. They bring small bowls of beer and bread and place them carefully. Their hands tremble at first, then steady, because repetition is a kind of courage. They speak in low voices, because no one wants to offend the air. They promise offerings. They promise order. And slowly, the sickness eases. The coughs thin. The fever breaks. People sit up again. Water is carried. Fire is tended. The city's sound returns, cautious at first, then fuller, like a flock of birds returning after a storm. Enlil does not feel satisfied. The noise rises again, because life does that. And life is exactly what is bothering him. So the second measure arrives. Hunger, not as a random bad year, but as a tightening. The rains do not come at the right time. The canals run lower. The grain heads are smaller. A field that should be green looks tired, like it is holding back. Storehouses that should be full echo with emptier space. A person lifts a jar and feels it is lighter than it should be. The sound of hunger is different from the sound of sickness. Sickness makes people quiet because breath is hard. Hunger makes people quiet because thinking becomes narrow. The mind stops wandering. It focuses on the next meal, on the last handful of grain, on the thin soup, on the child whose ribs show when the firelight flickers across skin. Enlil's aim is the same. Reduce the numbers. Reduce the pressure. Make the world manageable again. But Enki listens again. He does not like waste. Water does not like waste. It seeks a way. It finds a channel. So he guides humans again, teaching them to redirect their offerings, to appeal to the gods of grain, to cut off certain rites that feed the divine appetite in one direction and open them in another. In the logic of Mesopotamian religion, gods need offerings. They are not distant, self-sustaining abstractions. They eat. They drink. They rely on ritual the way humans rely on bread. Enki exploits that dependency. He shows humans how to bargain. Small changes, but effective. Offerings shift. A god who was withholding a resource is now acknowledged, soothed, fed. The gates of fertility open again. Just enough. The fields recover. The hunger loosens its grip, and the sound returns. It always returns. Because humans, once made, do not simply stop. They keep being alive. They keep making children. They keep building walls. They keep arguing. They keep laughing. They keep making the night loud with ordinary existence. From Enlil's perspective, it is unbearable. From our perspective, it is the point of living. This is the tension at the heart of these myths. The gods want order and rest. Humans create motion and sound. The system keeps trying to solve the problem by reducing the humans. Enki keeps trying to solve the problem by preserving them. And in the background, like a low drum you can feel more than hear, is the old memory of labor. The humans are still doing the work the Igigi refused. The canals still require dredging. The dikes still require repair. The temple bricks still require carrying. The world is still maintained by hands that can blister. That is part of the darkness too. Not just that humans suffer, but that their suffering is woven into the system as function. Yet even in that, the myth keeps slipping. In its strange honesty, the gods need humans. They need the work. They need the offerings. They cannot simply wipe the slate clean without consequence. So Enlil's frustration grows. He sees Enki's interference as sabotage, even if it is never called that openly. Each time a population reduction begins, something shifts. Something eases, something heals, and the humans swell again. Enlil feels mocked by life itself, and you can almost sense his impatience hardening into a single drastic decision. The council is called again, and this time the mood is heavier. The lamplight seems dimmer. The dust hangs in thicker strands. Even the air feels tense, as if it knows something is coming. Enlil speaks of an ending, not a small correction, a reset. Water will do it, he implies, because water is both life and erasure in the riverlands. The same rivers that feed the fields can also rise and swallow them. The same canals that give order can also turn into channels of destruction if the banks collapse. A flood is the most complete kind of silence. It does not just quiet a city. It removes it. Enki hears the word, even before it is fully spoken, and something in him tightens. If you were standing here with me, beside our own fireplace, you might feel your jaw clench without realizing it. Not in fear, exactly. More in recognition. Because the flood is not only myth, it is memory. It is the kind of disaster that leaves a layer in the earth, a band of silt that future hands will uncover and wonder about. The tablets themselves hint at this. They speak of floods as divine acts, but the ground remembers them as water and mud. And Enki, the god of water, understands both sides. He knows the council's logic. He also knows what water can do when it is unleashed. So he begins to prepare for a different kind of workaround, one that will not be solved by shifting offerings or redirecting prayers. This time, the solution will need wood and reeds, pitch and rope, patient hands, and a secret spoken sideways. A boat. Not yet. But soon. For now, let the fire in our room soften. Let your breath lengthen. Let the sound of the river in your imagination stay steady. Because the council is about to bind itself with an oath, and Enki is already searching for the smallest loophole, the thinnest crack, the narrowest channel where life might slip through the coming water. And in the distance, beyond the city's walls, the wind changes its taste, carrying the scent of rain that has not fallen yet. If you want to feel how this myth might have sounded to a person who lived beside these rivers, picture one worker, just one, in the early dawn. He steps down into a canal trench while the sky is still bruised purple. The air is cool for a moment, cool enough that his breath shows. His feet sink into silt that grips like a slow hand. He lifts a wooden shovel, its handle polished by many palms, and he scrapes the bottom where the water has dropped its load. Silt comes up heavy and shining. He tips it into a basket. The basket bites his shoulder when he lifts it. He walks 3 steps, 10 steps, 20, and dumps the mud onto the bank where it will dry into a crust, where it will become part of the wall that holds water back the next time the river swells. Scrape, lift, walk, dump, scrape, lift, walk, dump. The sun rises and the trench warms. Sweat gathers between shoulder blades. Flies arrive, patient and persistent. A distant voice calls out, not unkindly, but with that tone of oversight that makes you feel you are always being measured. That simple sequence, repeated day after day, is the human echo of what the myths say the gods once did. It is why the story of divine exhaustion lands the way it does. The people who heard these poems knew the feeling of work that never ends, work that must be done because if it is not done, the river takes everything back. They also knew what it felt like to watch water rise. The first thin line of wetness on a wall, the way mud turns slick underfoot, the way a reed roof sounds when rain becomes steady, the way a mother's hands move faster when she packs a bundle, because her mind has already accepted what her mouth will not say. So when the myth says Enlil chooses water as the final silence, it is not abstract. It is not poetic only. It is practical fear wrapped in divine names, and that is why Enki's coming idea matters so much. It is not only cleverness, it is mercy shaped like a plan. He will not be able to stop the storm that is being called, but he might be able to hold a small pocket of living warmth inside it, like a lantern protected by cupped hands, like a coal kept alive under ash. He begins to watch the reeds more closely. He listens to the groan of wooden hulls pulled up on the bank. He notices where pitch is harvested, how it thickens when heated, how it seals a seam with dark patience. He is water, yes, but he is also craft. And somewhere in the human cities, a person is about to hear a voice through a wall and begin building without fully understanding why his hands have been chosen. The decision to flood the world is made in a room that does not shake when it happens. That is what feels strangest about it. No thunder cracks the ceiling. No stars fall. No one screams. A few voices speak, and a few heads nod, and the fate of countless lives is placed into motion as calmly as a canal gate being lifted. Enlil wants silence. He wants rest. He wants the pressure of human noise to stop pressing against the order he believes he is responsible for. And the council, weary of the cycle, weary of measures that only thin the population for a season, agrees to the most final solution they can imagine: a flood. In the myth, it is framed as a necessity. In the body, it feels like a threat. And before the plan can be carried out, the gods do something that always makes me think of bureaucracy with divine faces. They swear an oath. No god will warn humanity. No god will slip a hint into a dream. No god will speak a secret into the ear of a favored priest. Everyone must be complicit. That is how you make a policy hold. You spread the responsibility so widely that no one can pretend innocence. Enki swears too. This is not because he agrees. It is because he understands how oaths work, how language can bind, and how language can be bent, how a promise can be obeyed in one way and violated in another. If you were standing here with me, you might feel that chill again, the one that comes when you realize the cleverest resistance is sometimes forced to wear the mask of obedience. So Enki returns to his own domain, to the Apsu, to the cool hush of water, but his mind is on the surface, on the reeds, on the human houses made of mud brick that will dissolve when the river rises. He thinks of the canal banks that will collapse into wide, muddy wounds. He thinks of children's footprints that will vanish. He thinks of the smell of smoke that will be replaced by the smell of wet silence. And he does not speak to a human. He speaks to a wall. This is one of those moments that feels almost like a storyteller's wink. In Atrahasis and in later flood traditions, Enki cannot break his oath by warning a person directly, so he warns something that is not a person. A reed wall. A house wall made of woven reeds, plastered with clay, breathing faintly in the night as it cools. Enki leans close to it, and his voice is low, not theatrical, just urgent in a quiet way. "Reed wall," he says. "Pay attention to my words." The wall does not nod. It cannot swear oaths. It cannot be punished. But on the other side of the wall, a human hears. Atrahasis, or a figure like him, the name shifting between versions, but always the same type of person, attentive, practical, capable of listening to quiet things. He hears Enki's instruction. Build a boat, not a small canoe, not something for a quick crossing. A vessel large enough to hold life, to hold seed, to hold animals, to hold the possibility of a restart. The instructions are careful. The shape is specified. The materials are named. Reeds, wood, rope, pitch to seal the seams, a roof to keep rain from filling the interior, compartments, space, weight distribution. The myth, in its own way, is interested in engineering. It knows that survival is not magic. Survival is craftsmanship. So Atrahasis begins, quietly. Because in a city of ears, secrecy is its own kind of labor. He gathers reeds and says he is repairing a house. He collects wood and says he is building storage. He mixes pitch and says it is for waterproofing baskets. People believe what they need to believe to keep their own fear asleep. The boat rises slowly, day by day, like a new building project on a riverbank. The smell of pitch grows strong, sweet and sharp. It clings to hands and hair. It stains nails, dark. It sticks to clothing. The work is repetitive. Heat the pitch. Spread it. Press reeds into place. Bind with rope. Check the seams with fingertips. The sound of tools becomes a private rhythm. Tap. Press. Pull. Tie. Atrahasis's breath matches it. In the evenings, when the light fades, he sits inside the half-built hull and listens to the river. It sounds normal. It sounds like it always has. like water moving through its accustomed lines, like the world is stable. That is what makes the coming flood so eerie. There is always a moment before disaster when the world still pretends nothing will change. Then the sky shifts. Clouds gather with a thickness that feels heavy, not only in the air but in the mind. Wind turns strange. Birds go quiet. The scent of the world changes. That electric hint of rain, mixed with river mud, mixed with something older, as if deep water is rising from below the earth. Atrahasis loads the boat. Family first, then supplies. Grain in jars, water in skins, tools, small sacred objects that feel too important to leave behind. Animals, in the versions that include them, guided carefully, calmed with soft voices, coaxed up a ramp that creaks under weight. The door is sealed. The roof is shut, and then the rain begins. Not as a gentle tapping, but as a steady insistence. At first, it feels like any storm. The roof drums. The air smells wet. The river rises in a way that seems manageable. People in the city close doors. Bank fires. Wait it out. Then the river keeps rising. Canal banks soften. Dikes begin to weep. Water pushes through small cracks, then wider breaks. It spreads over fields. It enters courtyards. It climbs steps. It swirls around ankles, then knees. The sound of the city changes. A city has its own music. Even at night, distant voices. Dogs. The clink of pottery. The soft cough of fire. When floodwater arrives, the music becomes water and nothing else. A constant rushing, punctuated by the dull impact of objects bumping and drifting. A jar here, a plank there, a roof beam breaking loose and floating like a stunned animal. Atrahasis' boat lifts. That moment, when the hull stops being supported by earth and begins to be supported by water, is strangely quiet inside. You feel it more than you hear it. A slight shift in balance. A new kind of sway. The boat becomes a living thing, rocking. Outside, the world dissolves into gray. Rain blurs the horizon. Sky and water become one wide surface. The normal lines of land vanish. The city becomes shapes beneath the surface. Then not even that. In the myths, the gods themselves react with fear. They did not expect the flood to feel so immense, so absolute. They authorized it, yes, but when they see the water erase what was built, they recoil. They flee upward. They huddle. They become small in their own creation. I have always found that detail strange and revealing. It suggests that even gods can miscalculate. That a solution chosen in a council chamber can become something uncontrollable once it moves into the real world. The flood lasts long enough that time loses its familiar markers. Inside the boat, days become dim, cycles of wet light and darker wet night. The air grows stale. The smell of pitch mixes with animal breath, with human breath, with damp grain. People speak softly to conserve energy, to conserve hope. They listen to rain the way you listen to your own heartbeat when you are waiting for a doctor's verdict. Water slaps the hull in slow rhythms. Sometimes there is a loud impact, a log, a roof, something from the old world bumping and drifting past. The boat shudders, then steadies. The rope bindings creak. The pitch holds. Atrahasis waits. And eventually, the rain lessens. The sound outside changes from roar to patter. The boat's rocking becomes smaller. The air feels different, less dense. A tiny bird sound returns, uncertain, as if the world is testing whether it is allowed to live again. The water begins to fall. Slowly, it reveals the tops of reeds, then patches of mud, then broken lines of what used to be roads. The boat settles, not with a crash, but with a soft grounding, like a deep exhale. When Atrahasis opens the door, the smell that comes in is not the smell of a living city. It is clean and ruined at the same time. Wet clay, rotting reeds, the sharpness of exposed earth. The absence of smoke is what stands out most. No cooking fires, no hearths, no human warmth in the air. He steps out carefully. His feet sink into mud that feels newly made. The world looks younger, but not in a gentle way. It looks stripped. And then, in the myth, the first offering is made. A small fire, a bit of bread, a bowl of beer, something simple. And the gods, deprived of offerings while humans were gone, gather. The old texts say they gather like flies. It is a harsh image, but it tells you the truth of this theology. The gods need what humans do. They need the ritual. They need the smoke and scent. They need the exchange. When Enlil sees that a human survived, he is furious at first. His plan was supposed to be total. His silence was supposed to be complete. But Enki speaks again, and this time there is no reed wall between them. He reminds the council of their own dependency, of the fact that wiping out humanity completely would leave the gods hungry and unsupported. So they compromise. They accept that humans will remain, but not unchecked. They introduce limits. In some tellings, they establish natural death, so humans do not live forever. They create infertility in some, and they appoint certain classes of women, priestesses, to remain childless, serving as social breaks. They allow childhood illness. They allow loss. They build vulnerability into the system, so the population cannot swell into another unbearable noise. It is chilling, but it is also consistent with the myth's logic. The world is managed like a temple estate. Numbers must be controlled. Resources must be balanced. The gods want offerings, but not an overwhelming crowd. And the humans, who began as a labor solution, become something else again, survivors. A species that cannot be erased, only managed. If you let yourself sit with that, it becomes oddly calming, in a dark way, because it means endurance is possible even under crushing systems. It means a single boat, built quietly, can carry a future through water that was meant to end everything. And it means that the most frightening decisions are not always made with hatred. Sometimes They are made with tiredness, with impatience, with a desire for quiet. That is what makes them dangerous. They can feel reasonable to the ones who make them. Tonight, as you listen, let the flood become a distant sound, like rain on a roof you trust. Let the boat's slow rocking match your breathing. Inhale, and feel the chest rise. Exhale, and let it fall. The water that once threatened to erase everything is now falling back into its channels. Mud is settling. New reeds are rising. And in the hush after catastrophe, the world begins again. Not clean, not innocent, but alive. In the next part of the story, we will linger in that new world. We will walk through the first rebuilt paths, feel the weight of limits the gods imposed, and notice the strange inheritance humans carry, created to serve, yet made from clay that remembers hands, and from divine essence that remembers rebellion. The river flows again. The work begins again. But so does the quiet stubbornness of being here, and somewhere far ahead of Atrahasis, far beyond his lifetime, far beyond the rebuilt huts and the first new canals, someone will press a stylus into wet clay and write this down. That detail matters to me, because it means the story was not only told to scare children into obedience, it was told to explain a world that felt unstable, a world where water could rise and erase the work of 1,000 hands, and where the only protection against that erasure was memory and planning. A tablet, once dried, is a kind of small ark too. It carries a voice through time. It carries the smell of river mud in the grooves of its wedges, if you know how to imagine it. It carries the hush of a scribal room, the quiet scratch of reed on clay, the pause when the scribe lifts his hand and listens to see if anyone else is in the doorway. Sometimes I picture you and me in a museum, walking slowly, not talking much, our footsteps softened by polished stone. Glass cases glow with gentle light. Inside them, small broken tablets rest like fallen teeth of history. We lean close. We cannot read the wedge marks without training, but we can feel the intention. Someone wanted this to last. Someone wanted the memory of water, and oath, and loophole, and boat to remain. And if you stay with that image, it turns the flood into something less frantic. It becomes a long, slow wave moving through a story that has already survived. Because here we are, breathing in a quiet room, hearing the myth in a different century, with a different kind of fire. The river is still flowing. The work is still being done, and the old lesson is still there, like a steady pulse beneath the words even when power tries to enforce silence. Life finds a channel. So let your eyelids grow heavy if they want to. Let the boat rock. Let the rain fade into a soft distance. The world after the flood is rebuilding itself in slow, careful motions, one reed laid on another, one breath following the next. The world after the flood is not a blank page. It is a page that has been soaked, dried, and stained, and when you run your finger across it, you can still feel the faint ridges where the old writing once was. That is what the riverlands are like in the myths, and in the bones of history too. Water comes, Water goes, and what remains is never clean. It is mud packed into corners. It is silt laid down in a quiet layer. It is the smell of wet clay that has been asked to become a wall again. Atrahasis steps onto land that does not feel like it belongs to him. The air is open in a way that is almost frightening. No smoke threads up from neighboring roofs. No distant conversation drifts on the wind. Even the dogs are gone, or silent, or swallowed by the huge rearrangement the flood has done. The first few days are a kind of careful wandering. He walks slowly, because the ground lies to the foot now. A solid patch becomes a soft sink. A harmless puddle becomes a hidden trench. Every step asks for attention. Footsteps in mud have a sound like a gentle suction, a soft pulling, as if the earth is reluctant to let go of anyone who survived. He finds pieces of the old world. A roof beam lodged sideways in reeds. A clay jar cracked, but still holding a few stubborn grains stuck to the bottom. A length of rope that smells of rot and river. A child's toy. Maybe. A carved bit of wood, smooth from small hands, now floating in a shallow pool that reflects the sky with an indifferent calm. If you were standing here with me, you might feel a strange quiet in your chest. Not peace. Exactly. More like the mind being forced to widen because there is nothing left to focus on but the present moment. And then the work begins again. It always does. Atrahasis and his family rebuild with what they can find. Reeds cut and bundled. Mud pressed and shaped. Walls raised while the sun dries them. A roof woven tight enough to keep a gentle rain out. A hearth dug into the earth, lined with stones, if stones can be found. The first fire is small. A few twigs, a little dried reed, a breath coaxing flame into life. The flame's light makes everything feel less empty. It paints the new walls with a warm color. It makes the air smell of smoke again, and that smell is a kind of proof a human presence has returned. And the gods gather. The old stories do not hide that hunger. They say it plainly, even if it is uncomfortable to read. When the offerings rise again, the divine assembly leans in. The gods need what humans do. They need the smoke and scent. They need the ritual rhythm of bread and beer placed in careful hands. It is a dependency that flips the usual shape of religion. Humans kneel, yes, but the gods also wait. Enlil arrives with anger. He did not want survivors. He wanted a final silence, a clean administrative end. For a moment, you can almost feel him looking at the small, rebuilt hearth and hearing the return of human sound, and feeling that old irritation flare again. But now the council has seen the edge of its own mistake. It has seen what happens when the source of offerings disappears. It has tasted the emptiness of a world with no human hands to keep the exchange going. So Enlil must accept what he does not like. Humans will remain, but not uncontrolled. This is the part of the myth that feels like a cold hand placed gently on the back of a growing thing. The council invents limits. They weave fragility into the human design. Natural death becomes part of the pattern, not as a punishment for specific acts, but as policy. A life now has a curve. It rises. It peaks. It falls. The earth receives the body again. Dust returns to dust. Clay returns to clay. Some births will not come. Some wombs will be closed. Some women will be devoted to temple service and will not have children, or will be guided into a life of ritual instead of lineage. The texts suggest different mechanisms depending on the version, and it is debated how these details were used socially, whether as mythic explanation for infertility or as divine justification for priestly institutions that controlled reproduction and labor. But whatever the interpretation, the effect is the same. The numbers shrink, or rather, the numbers are forced to stop expanding without end. I keep thinking of a city at night. 1,000 lamps in 1,000 windows. Imagine someone, somewhere, watching those lights and feeling not comfort but fear, thinking too many, too bright, too loud. That is Enlil's mind in these stories. It is the mind of authority that experiences life as pressure. And Enki's mind is different. Enki does not love the limits, but he accepts the compromise because it keeps humanity alive. He knows that survival is often bought through bargains that leave a bitter taste. Still, he continues doing what he always does. He teaches, not always openly, not always in ways that can be traced back to him, but in the drift of culture, in the growth of craft, in the slow emergence of knowledge. Enki's influence feels like water finding a path around obstacles. Humans learn to build better canals. They learn to read the river's breath, the way it rises and falls, the way it carries silt, the way it changes color when floods are coming. They learn to organize work, to gather in teams, to rotate labor so one back is not broken alone. Or at least, they learn the idea of it, even if their rulers do not always follow it. They learn to measure grain. They learn to mark boundaries with stones. They learn to stack mud brick into shapes that rise like frozen waves. And they learn to write. That last one is where the story becomes almost haunted, because writing turns work into memory. A canal is physical and must be rebuilt when it silts in. But a tablet, once dried, can survive floods, fires, collapses, the slow decay of cities. It can be buried in dust and then found again. When I picture this, I see a quiet room lit by oil lamps, the ceiling low, the air smelling of smoke and clay. A scribe sits on woven matting. His hands are stained with damp earth, and his reed stylus makes small clicks as it presses wedge marks into the surface. Each mark is a little act of containment, a way of trapping sound in clay. If you were standing behind him, you might hear his breathing, slow and careful, because writing is a kind of patience. You might also hear the distant river, always present, always shifting, like a reminder that nothing stays stable except what we choose to hold on to. The myth tells us the world was built by exhausted gods and maintained by humans who were made to replace them. But history shows humans were never only replacements. They became builders of meaning. They turned labor into cities, and cities into stories, and stories into tablets that outlasted the people who made them. That is the part I find almost soothing, even while it is dark, because it suggests that purpose, even if assigned, can be reshaped. The Igigi were made to work, and they refused. Humans were made to work, and we kept working. But we also did something else. We made songs, laws, jokes, prayers. We made art in the margins of duty. We made time feel different. Still, the memory of the flood remains in the soil. In some ancient cities, archaeologists found flood layers, bands of silt that sit between older bricks and newer ones. Deep time pressed into a thin line. You can imagine a future person, centuries later, digging a foundation for a new wall and finding that strange layer of fine clay that does not match the bricks above or below. He pauses. He wipes sweat from his face. He looks at the gray band and feels a shiver of story. He might not know Atrahasis' name, but he knows what water can do. And he knows that what was built can be unbuilt, not by malice, but by the indifferent power of a river that has been given too much room. So the city builds again, with a kind of humble vigilance. New dikes, new canals, new rules about who works where and when, new rituals asking the gods to keep the waters in their banks. And overhead, in the myth, the gods watch their world continue, as if the flood was not an ending, only a correction. But for the humans who live in the aftermath, it is never only a correction. It is the proof that stability is borrowed. It is the reason a person keeps an extra jar of grain, just in case. It is the reason a mother checks the sky's color more carefully than her grandmother did. It is the reason a scribe writes things down, because the river can take voices away, but clay can hold them a little longer. Tonight, let that be the feeling you carry. Not panic, not dread, just a slow awareness, like a candle flame steadying after a draft. The world is fragile, yes, and yet it keeps returning. The river breathes in and out. The dust settles. The clay hardens. Footsteps return to the roads. Soft at first, then confident. And somewhere, inside the divine politics and the human rebuilding, the old spark of rebellion remains. Not loud, not violent. Just present the knowledge that systems change when the burden becomes too much, and that even the highest authority must sometimes accept a compromise with life itself. There is a moment, later, when the first new camp circle forms. It is not grand. It is simply practical. A few shelters set at respectful distance. Openings turn toward a lightening horizon. Someone scrapes a ring in the dirt to mark where a fire will go. Someone else smooths a patch of ground with the flat of a hand. These are tiny motions, but they carry the weight of an entire civilization waiting to happen. I imagine a child watching the adults work, not understanding the politics of gods, only feeling the comfort of routine returning. A mat unrolled, a pot hung over coals, rain beginning outside, and the family listening to it with quiet attention. The way you listen when you have survived the worst and you do not want to be surprised again. In that listening, the mind learns caution. In that caution, culture begins. When the new canals are dug, they are not dug as if this is a human invention. They are dug as a continuation. The shovel bites into earth. The earth smells metallic and ancient. A thin line of water gathers at the bottom of the trench, and the diggers pause to watch it, because water is never only water here. It is the life of the land, the gift and the threat, the breath of the world. And then, quietly, the need for records arrives. A tablet can be a receipt, yes, but it is also a map of responsibility. Who owes labor? Who delivered grain? Who repaired a breach in a dike? Who failed? The wedge marks become a way of holding authority to its own words, at least a little. So picture an ancient storehouse at dusk. The air tastes of dust. A clerk steps carefully between shelves. His sandals make soft scuffs on packed earth. He carries a tablet like something fragile, even though it is only clay, because the clay holds the world in it. Outside, workers lift baskets. Outside, the river keeps moving, always looking for the lowest path. Inside, the record stays still. Inside, the breath slows. That is the shadow the myth casts. Not only gods, but every hierarchy, every promise made by those who rest while others dig. Yet the ending of this part is not bitterness. It is steadiness. Because after the flood, reality becomes learnable again. You can build routines inside it. A fire, a jar of clean water, a candle flame, footsteps returning to a road that was washed clean, and the sense that tomorrow, even if the river rises, you will notice earlier. You will respond sooner. You will rebuild again. Sometimes, in the late hour when the fire has fallen into coals, Atrahasis sits at the doorway of the new shelter and watches the dark. The glow behind him is low, mostly orange, breathing under ash. The air smells of smoke and damp earth. In the distance, the river speaks in small sounds, a slap against reeds, a gurgle around a bend, a hush that feels like a creature shifting in sleep. He does not know what the gods will decide next. He only knows that he is alive, and that being alive means paying attention. He listens the way you listen in a museum hush, careful not to disturb what has survived. He counts the quiet moments like beads, one, then another, letting the night teach his body that it is allowed to rest. In the next part, we will step closer to the beginning again, back into the older violence of the Enuma Elish and the colder bargains of creation. And we will listen for the soft human heartbeat inside the thunder of gods. The last thing the old tablets give you is not a neat ending. They give you a feeling, a long echo in a corridor, a slow drip in a dark place, a question that does not demand an answer, only attention. When I think of the Anunnaki and the Igigi, I do not picture bright heavens with choirs. I picture a worksite at dawn, the kind of dawn that turns everything the color of ash. I picture baskets, pickaxes, hands wrapped in cloth, breath turning visible in cold air over water. The gods were there first. The myths say, before any human foot pressed into mud, the junior gods were already bent over canals, their backs under loads that did not feel poetic at all. The world was being made in the way a city is made, through stubborn repetition. Day after day, cut and carry. still and lift. And then, at the edge of endurance, they stopped. They burned the tools. They walked together through the night and surrounded the house of command. I have always found it strange that the oldest creation stories so often begin with conflict or fatigue, not with beauty. It is almost as if the people who wrote them were too honest to pretend that anything real comes without cost. Even the sky, in the Babylonian telling, is a kind of wound that never fully heals. Tiamat's body becomes the dome overhead, the earth beneath, the sources of rivers. Creation as a rearrangement of what was broken. If you let that thought settle, it can feel heavy. So let us soften it. Let us hold it like a warm cup in both hands. Because the darkness in these myths is not the kind that leaps out at you. It is the kind that lies under the surface, calm and steady, like deep water, and you can float on it. You can let it carry you. The gods do what rulers often do. They create systems. They divide domains. They hold councils. They speak in commands and policies. They call exhaustion a problem to be solved, not a pain to be soothed. When the workers rebel, Enlil wants punishment. It is his first language. He asks for the instigator. He wants an example. Enki listens instead. He hears the simple sentence, "The work is killing us," and he offers a solution that is both clever and chilling. Not comfort, not rest for the workers, but replacement. Create a new being. Mix clay with the essence of a god. Make something that can carry the baskets. And humans arrive in the story like a quiet tool set down on the ground. Useful, intended, necessary. This is the dark truth the myths whisper you may have been wanted for your function before you were wanted for your soul. If that stings, breathe. Slowly in, through the nose. Hold for a moment. Out through the mouth. Let the jaw unclench. Let your shoulders drop. Because even in this origin, there is an odd kind of power. The gods needed help. The gods needed hands that were not theirs. The universe, in these stories, is not held up by pure divinity. It is held up by labor. And labor has its own kind of dignity, even when it is exploited. The Igigi proved that. They were not the highest. They were not the planners. They were the ones who touched the mud. And when they refused, the cosmos changed. That is the part I keep returning to, like a finger tracing a familiar groove in clay. Workers can refuse, even divine workers. And if even gods can be forced into negotiation, then nothing that calls itself eternal is entirely beyond change. Now, the myths do not turn this into a sermon. They do not say, "Rise up and overthrow." They simply record what happened, and the record itself is enough. The Igigi's rebellion becomes a memory that lives inside the human story, whether humans notice it or not. Because after humanity is created, the gods do not get peace. They get new problems. Humans multiply. Humans make noise. Humans fill the cities with sound, and sound becomes a kind of pressure on authority. Enlil complains again. He cannot sleep. So he tries to reduce the noise. Plague famine, flood. Each attempt is a blunt instrument, a storm used as policy, and each time, Enki slips a small act of protection through the cracks. A hint, a warning, a reed wall that hears what an oath cannot silence. A boat built in secret, its seams smeared with bitumen, its ribs smelling of wood and wet earth. And after the flood, the gods compromise, again, because they have learned the terrible lesson of their own dependency. Without humans, no offerings. Without offerings, a kind of divine hunger. So the council does what councils do. They write new rules. Mortality, infertility, limits on numbers. An attempt to keep life manageable. You can feel the chill of administration in it, but you can also feel the weary wisdom. A world without limits becomes unbearable, not only for rulers, but for the land itself. Fields exhaust, canals silt, bodies tire. Deep time keeps its count, and it is never kind. And yet, humans persist. They keep rebuilding. They keep lifting mud brick into sunlit walls. They keep listening for the river's breath at night. They keep placing small lamps in windows, making the darkness less absolute. They make museums of memory, even if the museum is only a shelf of tablets in a temple storehouse, quiet as a prayer, the air thick with dust and incense. They write down the lists of grain, the names of kings, the inventories of tools. And sometimes, if you read between the lines, you can sense the human voice slipping through the bureaucracy. A complaint, a joke, a note of pride, a tired shorthand that says we did the work, and outside those storehouses, the world goes on doing what it always does. Rivers swell, then recede. Silt settles in thin bands. Cities rise, collapse, rise again. The numbers shrink, then grow, then shrink. History, like water, is cyclical. It does not move in a straight line. It bends. It loops. It returns. Some scholars argue that these myths encode social realities, temples as employers, gods as the owners of land, humans as the workforce bound by duty. It is debated how literally the earliest audiences took the stories, whether they imagined gods with pickaxes in the same way they imagined a king with a scepter, or whether the images were always symbolic, always a way of speaking about power and obligation. We cannot be sure, but here is what we can be sure of. Because it lives in the texture of the texts, the ancient people who told these stories knew the weight of work. They knew the fear of flood. They knew the politics of authority. They knew the bitterness of being necessary and still being treated as replaceable. They knew that systems depend on those they burden. And that knowledge, once spoken, never fully goes away. If you were standing with me by this fireplace, you might hear the soft crack of wood, the faint sigh of flame as it eats. You might smell candle wax and old paper. You might feel the room's warmth against your skin, and beyond that warmth, you might feel the huge cold of deep time. That cold does not have to frighten you. It can be soothing, like the idea that your worries are small enough to be carried by something older and steadier than your mind. Because deep time has seen everything: creation by labor, creation by violence, creation by compromise. And still, the river flows. Still, the dust settles. Still, the clay can be softened with water and shaped again. So tonight, take what you need from these myths. Not the cruelty, not the exhaustion. Take the quiet persistence. Take the image of a candle flame held steady in a draft. Take the sense that even if you were made for one purpose, you can grow into another, slowly, gently, over years, over generations. And take the soft truth that the story does not end with the gods. It ends with you, with your breath, right now, in and out, a small rhythm that belongs to you alone. The ancient pickaxes are gone, their wood rotted, their stone returned to earth. The divine counsels have faded into legend, but the feeling remains water, clay, dust, and the stubborn human habit of rebuilding. Let your thoughts loosen. Let them drift like silt settling through clear water. Let the room grow dimmer behind your eyelids. Before we let the fire go out, I want to guide you through one more chamber of the story, the chamber that smells of salt water and lightning. This is where the Enuma Elish begins, with waters not yet separated, sweet mingling with salt, everything blurred together like ink in a bowl. The young gods move and make noise, and the older powers, Absu and Tiamat, cannot rest. Absu wants silence badly enough to destroy what he helped create. Ea, later called Enki, answers the threat with craft. A spell laid over the waters until Absu sinks into an enchanted sleep, and then the son kills the father. The myth turns the murder into architecture. Ea builds his dwelling on what he has defeated. From that new dwelling, Marduk is born. Too many eyes, too many ears, fire at the lips, a being made for dominance. When he plays with the winds, the sea mother turns. Tiamat becomes an army. Monsters rise like storm shapes. Kingu receives the tablets of destiny, a small object with a huge implication, the right to decide what happens next. The younger gods panic, hold counsel, refuse to face her, until Marduk offers himself with a condition. Make me king, he says. Make my word law, safety in exchange for authority. They agree. They feast. They dress him in royal signs. He rides to war on a chariot of storm. When he faces Tiamat, the myth becomes almost clinical. A net, a wind forced into an open mouth, an arrow. The great mother falls. The world is made from her sky, from one half, earth from the other, and the rivers drawn out of the body of chaos itself. Even here, water remains the center. Even here, land is something shaped by violence, then maintained by labor. After the war, the gods are tired, and the story returns to its pragmatic heart. Who will do the work? Now Kingu becomes the answer. The council needs a guilty party, someone whose blood can become raw material. Kingu is executed. His blood is mixed with clay, and humanity is formed. In one telling, we are made to replace the Igigi. In another, we are made to carry the service of the gods. so the gods can be free. Different paths, same destination, and there is that haunting detail. Our substance includes rebellion. The blood of a god who stood against the new order runs in the mixture. A mythic way of saying that the worker carries not only obedience, but the capacity to refuse. Imagine the clay itself, wet in a bowl, being turned by hands. The soft slap as it folds, the way it holds fingerprints, the way it remembers pressure. A human shape forming not in a flash of light, but through handling. Then, against all intention, the created ones become more than the plan. They learn to watch water and predict its mood. They learn to turn fear into architecture, flood into levee, hunger into storehouse, chaos into ritual. They keep tablets in quiet rooms where the air tastes of dust, where voices lower without being told, where footsteps soften in a museum hush. That is how I imagine the oldest stories surviving. Not shouted, kept in stillness, carried forward by careful hands, passed from firelight to firelight, until one day someone finds the clay again, still holding the argument between command and craft, between punishment and workaround. Now, let the argument fade into the background, like a river's sound at a distance. Let the candlelight become smaller behind your eyelids. If your mind wants to think, let it think slowly, as if it is walking barefoot across cool stone. If it wants to drift, let it drift, as if it is a leaf on water, turning in gentle circles. The darkness is not chasing you. It is simply the room where sleep lives, and you are welcome there. Stay with the fireplace a little longer. Listen to the tiny sounds. A log settling, a faint tick as wax cools, your own breath moving in and out, steady as a slow tide. You do not have to solve anything tonight. You do not have to carry the whole burden of history, or myth, or labor on your shoulders. Let the burden sit on the ground for a while. If the story left you with a thorny feeling, let that feeling soften into a simple image, a single footprint in damp clay, filling slowly with clear water. The print stays. The water stays. Then the sun comes, and the surface hardens, and the mark becomes part of the earth. Nothing dramatic, just evidence that someone passed through and lived. That is enough. Good night.